Tune in to Jessica's channel to find out what crazy thing her puppy's playing with. Today he's playing with an oven mitt. And I have to put up my little timer because otherwise I will miss my bus, if you know what I mean. All right, from this point on I have half an hour. It's me, Jess. Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to wrap up the many books that I read in April. I read 8 books in April, and I'm also going to talk about 2 books that I read in what comes before April. Oh. March that I forgot to talk about in my March wrap up. So the reason why I forgot to wrap them was because they were library books. I'm going to start off with the books that underwhelmed, and then I will talk about the books that absolutely hit it out of the park. Yeah, I had some really good reads in April. I'm going to start with The Guest List. The Guest List by Lucy Foley. I think it's pronounced Foley, is a murder mystery about our main character Jules and her fiance Will, and the setup is that they're getting married in this on this isolated island in, I think it's in Ireland, somewhere on the cliffs of England, UK, Wales. Jules is self-made entrepreneur. She owns an online magazine called The Download, and Will is a famous celebrity type who has his own TV show, which is a survivalist. He, is left in the middle of nowhere and has to figure out how to survive. He's very good looking. He's a typical celebrity type. And somebody is murdered. We don't know who is murdered for most of the book, and we obviously don't know who the murderer is for most of the book, and it follows a dual timeline. And the wedding happens and when the murder happens, and all the tensions between the different characters who are invited to the wedding. One of them being Jono, who is supposedly Will's best friend, but of course we learn that they're not such good friends after all. Her best friend, Jules's best friend or close friend, Charlie, who also not a very likable character. Actually, most of the characters in this book aren't very likable, which is fun. A number of people, guests coming to the wedding, a variety of different characters, and the book is written from their different viewpoints. A lot of the guests who come to the wedding are people that he went to school with. He went to an exclusive boys' private school. Those are the majority of the guests. Jules' sister is the only bridesmaid. Her name is Olivia. Throughout the course of the book, you find out it goes back and forth between 2 different timelines: present day of the wedding, the day of the wedding, and leading up to the wedding. And you get to know the different characters leading up to the wedding and their relationships to one another. And as you're going back and forth between the different timelines, you're trying to figure out A, who was murdered, and B, who murdered them. Yeah, I mean, it was a decent mystery book. A lot of the characters were linked to one another in ways that I didn't think were realistic, or they came together because they needed to, for you to be able to suspect different people, I guess. I like mystery that is realistic, and if that means that it's predictable, then I don't mind. I know there are some mystery writers who write their mysteries because they want to keep you guessing all the way up until the end, but then that means that the conclusion is not really feasible. And so I really dislike it when I read a mystery novel and I get to a moment where I feel like, oh my God, seriously? That's not possible. I like it to be realistic, and if that makes it predictable, then that is what I prefer. And in this case, it was not feasible that all of these characters were linked in the way that they were linked. It just seemed too convenient, if you know what I mean. I'm disappointed because I've heard The Paris Apartment is not very good, and since I didn't even really like The Guest List that much, I'm not sure that I'm gonna, and I bought The Paris Apartment. It's making me pause about buying books. Now I'm like, I don't even want to read it, so I'll probably donate it. Boo! That sucked. Another book that everybody seems to have loved that I did not love is a book that I pulled for the BookTube spin. It's Luster by Raven Leilani. I almost DNF'd this book because I just kept wanting this book to be better than it was. I kept reading because I was invested in the character. I guess I should tell you about the plot of the novel. Well, it's a debut novel. I was kept hoping it was going to get better, and it just didn't get better ultimately, which is a drag. I mean, it had its moments, I will say. It had its moments, and I wouldn't discourage anyone from picking it up, because it definitely had its moments, and it could very well be something that other people love. I know that it's been categorized as millennial fiction, and I did read Exciting Times. I haven't read any Sally Rooney yet, but I did read Exciting Times, which I also didn't really like very much. So perhaps this is just a voice that I'm not feeling. Although I read The Idiot by Elif Batuman, and I loved it. So I don't know, I think it has more to do with the writing than anything else. So the story is about Edie, who's a 23-year-old black woman, young black woman living in New York City, initially working in publishing, but she's one of these characters a little bit like Queenie, which I really liked. Well, I definitely liked better than Lester. A little bit like the character Queenie, who is, I think she also worked in publishing, just about how she makes a lot of poor decisions. She loses her job, and then she starts dating this white man, married white guy named Eric, who's married to a woman named Rebecca, and they have an adopted child named Akila, who's black. I mean, it definitely had me thinking. It's not to say that it didn't have me thinking, but I just didn't find there was enough plot in this book for me, and the characters just seemed to behave in very strange and very random ways. It was sort of written like a slice of life, but it doesn't seem, again, I'm a person who prefers realistic, or if you're going to do something that's not realistic, that's very exaggerated to make a point, do it in a way that is really compelling. And I know that this was compelling for other people. It just didn't work for me. And I wish I could put my finger on why, because I don't want to be disrespectful. I think it had some interesting commentary on marriage and domesticity and married life, and certainly commentary on race. Edie just makes, but she just makes like these really terrible decisions that I feel like I didn't understand. I think there's a trend. I mean, obviously there's a trend in writing these characters, and I don't think it's very flattering to young women. Like, there's a trend in writing these characters who just make these terrible decisions, as young women sometimes do, but it's so exaggerated. It reminds me of my year of rest and relaxation. And there are books that I preferred that were like this, that were a little bit more dystopian, like Severance, for example. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Lester. That was a disappointment. Another disappointment for me was The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. I just wanted to love this book, and loved it initially because I really enjoyed the parts of this book where she was writing about, I mean, she had worked in the publishing industry, so she clearly knows it really well. I really enjoyed the parts of this book that talked about the publishing industry and the experience of being a black woman in the publishing industry. I think of all of these books that are addressing that topic, this one is really the best at demonstrating the type of racism and the type of privilege that white people have in the work world, and the way and how unconscious they are of it, and in some cases how malicious they are with it. That I really appreciated about the book. It was just that the thriller part of this book didn't work for me. I mean, like, if I compare it to When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which was, I thought, way more scary. She did a better job of creating fear. I just didn't feel really afraid for Nella, who's the main character in the book. So just to go to the plot, the story follows Nella, a young black woman working in publishing at a publishing house called Wagner Publishing. She is someone who is trying to improve the world. She's trying to make her work environment more diverse, more aware, more progressive. There's a new hire at her office named Hazel, another black woman, and she gets really excited because she thinks that this person is going to be an ally and that they're going to work together to improve the world. It's very idealistic in her mind. And Hazel kind of seems to be working against her and working for her own ambitions at this publisher's where they work. She gets a note, she finds a note at her desk saying that she should quit, and the whole time we're wondering if it's Hazel who's written the note and is trying to get her. But I think we're supposed to be suspicious of Hazel. And then it goes back and forth between them working in the publishing house at Wagner and this backstory of Wagner publishing another book by a Black woman, a Black publisher. So this relationship between this Black writer and this Black publisher, Kendra and Diana. The only problem is that it goes back and forth kind of randomly, and there are some other random characters, and it starts to get kind of confusing. It gets to a point where you don't really understand their story, or their story isn't very well developed. So that part of the story was really disappointing, and I think it had so much potential to work as a thriller. So I think, I don't know, there was something to do with hair cream that was like a potion, like a magic potion. I don't want to give too much away. But what was interesting is that it does ask this very basic question, I think for young women in general, but for sure for young Black women in the context of this story. It asks the very basic question of, if you can't beat them, join them. And in many ways, Hazel has joined them. Like she's adjusting, she's accommodating to her environment so that she can get ahead. Nella has a more, I mean, I'd say rebellious, but it's not complete outright rebellion, but she has a more confrontational approach. She wants to confront the issues that she's facing in the work environment. And that was really well done. There's a couple of excellent scenes that are so well done. There is a scene, for example, where they're choosing a cover for an author's book, and it's completely inappropriately representing the Black character. And Ella wants to speak up about it. And anyway, that scene is really well done. So I think for a debut novel, this has a lot of good elements to it. But the abstract part of it just didn't work for me. This underground movement, I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand the relationship between that and the publisher. Like there's some implied relationship between the head of the publishing house being involved in what happened with Kendra and Diana. I didn't get it. I didn't know what happened, and that's not a good thing. And I don't think it's me. It could be me. Maybe I need to reread it, but I don't think it was me. Not as wonderful as I had hoped that it would be. The two books that I got out from the library, Intimacies by Kitamura. This book was really hyped. I thought it was going to be better than it was. This seems to be the theme for the books that just didn't live up to my expectations in April. This book was interesting in some ways. The main character, she's nameless, is a woman who moves from New York to The Hague to work as an interpreter in the court at The Hague for war crimes. It's a court where they try people for war crimes. I think that it had some really interesting commentary about the way that the court works and who is tried of war crimes in this. It's mostly African countries, so it's a very westernized system. I thought that was really interesting. Well, let me just again tell you the plot before I always jump into my thoughts before I talk about the plot. So let me talk about the plot. So she's moved from New York to do this job, and she ends up dating a man named Adrian who's married but is separating from his wife, and his wife has left. She's left him and taken her kids, and she's left him for another man, and she's somewhere, I think she's somewhere in Portugal. I'm not sure where she went. They start dating, and she also has a couple of, like, she has another friend who is in the first portion of the book, but then kind of that relationship kind of dissipates. I don't know, there's a couple, this is the thing, it's a little bit hard to talk about the plot because there are a lot of elements in the plot line that are incomplete. And I guess that would have been on purpose, but particularly in her personal life, it's very odd. I think it's a commentary on, so for her job as an interpreter, there's a lot of discussion about what it means to interpret, that you have to be impartial, that you have to be really detached from what it is that you're speaking about in order to be able to interpret well. You can't be emotional, obviously, and you have to be very detached. So she becomes the personal interpreter of a war criminal who specifically asks for her in her job at The Hague. And she really has to keep this distance to be able to interpret, but then in a way it gets mirrored in her relationships with other people. So she also keeps this very big distance in her relationships. So I think that was quite well done, but in a way it's not very satisfying because you don't know anything more about these characters. For example, there's this character, Anton, who gets mugged in her friend's neighborhood, but then we don't really know the full story of that. Like, I think she's making commentary on violence, but I think I'd have to reread it to... So it brought up a lot of ideas worth considering. but as a book, as a novel, it felt incomplete. It felt underdeveloped. It was short too, so I think it could have been just a little bit longer, and some of that could have been a little bit better developed for the reader. So yeah, that was my opinion on that. I haven't read her other novel, and I'm not sure I will. That's Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. And then the other book that I took out from the library was Honor by Thrity Umrigar. This was an intense book. Whew. This was really good, and it follows the story. Well, I found it to be really good. It follows the story of Smita, who's a journalist who was born in India but moved to the States when she was young and was raised really in the US. And she goes back to India because a friend of hers, who is also a journalist, has been injured and I think she's having an operation. She's in the hospital. Smita goes ostensibly, I think, to just help her. But in the end, her friend, who's also a journalist, was working on a story, and she wants Smita to follow up on the story for her. And the story that Smita finds herself following up on is the story of a young girl named Meena, who was living in a rural part of India and was kind of secretly married to a man that she fell in love with. She's Hindu and he's Muslim, so that's not allowed. And what happens is Smita is sent to replace her friend at the trial because Meena is suing her brothers, or she's brought charges against her brothers because her brothers set her house on fire. And in that fire, her husband died and she was disfigured. And she has a child, she has a baby from that marriage, a little girl. Yeah, it was a really intense book. Luckily, Smita falls in love. Our main character falls in love with this man, Mohar, who's a friend of the journalist. Friend of hers, I'm sorry, I've forgotten her name. So that gives us a little bit of a reprieve from the intensity of the story that she's covering. And Smita is a really interesting character because she's reflecting on her relationship to her homeland, to the homeland that she remembers. There's some commentary on the disparity in wealth and what that has to do with this intense, like, ritualistic behavior by the brothers and burning the house. Yeah, it was really, really good. I highly recommend this book, actually. Honor. I mean, I think it's a pretty good reflection of the issues that are present in our world in terms of these intense tribal loyalties. Because the brothers set the house on fire. I think they were ordered to set the house on fire by the head of the village, but they were also totally okay with setting their sister's house on fire because they believed that her marrying this Muslim man was dishonoring their family and that they needed to avenge that and reestablish their family in having an honorable place in the village. So, whew, like, it's very heavy stuff. And of course, Smita has to grapple with this element of the culture in India and what could potentially be done about it. I mean, ultimately, I won't say what happens with the court case. In a way, it's very hopeful because there was a time where you wouldn't even see a case like this go to the court, but I'm not going to say what happened as a result of the court case because that would ruin the book. And I've already told you a lot of the plot of the book. So the love story between her and Mohar was really sweet. So it was a nice balance between that and the violence that was being covered in the trial. Very good read, but not exactly fun. If you know what I mean. Shall we talk about Bullet Train? Okay, let's talk about Bullet Train. Bullet Train was a fun one. I took it out from the library, got to return it. Actually, I had to renew it because it took me quite some time to get through Bullet Train. It's a Japanese kind of action thriller that takes place on a train. It's pretty long, 415 pages. This was really fun though. I really had fun with it. Bullet Train by Kotaro Isaka. Notice how there's a little ladybug in the middle of the bullseye? That's for a reason. I feel like I want to do a video sometime that discusses covers and their meaning. Some covers are so good. Again, I digress. So this story follows several characters, many of whom are criminal characters who are part of the underworld, but I would say the main plot, there's sort of two plots, but the main plot story is about a man named Kitamura, whose son is in a coma in the hospital. We find out that he's in a coma in the hospital because a group of kids were incited to push him off the roof of a shopping mall. The kid who incited this violence against Kimura's son is this character called Prince, who's a 14-year-old boy who is literally psychotic. Kimura is on the train to avenge his son. No, I don't know actually why he's on the train. I kind of missed that part. So, but anyway, point is that they're both on this train. Prince, the 14-year-old boy, is extremely manipulative and is like very in control of Kimura, and the situation digresses because he claims that if anything happens to him, if he doesn't get to the destination at the end of the train ride, and if he doesn't answer his phone, which he has on him, he has instructed somebody to basically kill his son, like unplug his machine at the hospital. Meanwhile, we have this other pair referred to as fruit. So we go back and forth from different point of views. The fruit are Tangerine and Lemon, and they're a pair that are working. They're like henchmen working in the underworld, and they were hired by a man, a mysterious man, to take a suitcase on the train and deliver it along with the man's son. The man turns out to be a mafia head. And then we have Nano, Ladybug, a couple of great names. And there's another guy named Hornet, another guy named Morning Glory. I was getting a little confused, but it all gets sorted out. There's a lot of mayhem in this book. What goes on? There's snakes in the book. There are needles in the book. There's an umbrella that causes a bit of problems. There's electric shocks in the book. At first I thought there was going to be some cruelty to animals. Luckily they kind of didn't go too far with it. But a lot of mayhem ensues on this train. Nano. He has been hired in this very mysterious context. Like, he doesn't really know why. He just knows he's supposed to get the suitcase. The same suitcase that Tangerine and Lemon are. This sounds so strange. The same suitcase that Tangerine and Lemon are delivering. I did think that it took a while to get the payoff. Like, it was slow. Like, you have to be prepared for a slow burn. Yeah, so I felt like it dragged a little bit in parts, which is kind of strange to say that it dragged a little in parts. Oh, and Nano has like, our Ladybug, Nano is like, he has really bad luck. That's one of his things. It was fun. It was a fun read. A lot of people are loving this book right now, so. But it wasn't like I loved it. It's too bad that they put the bar across here because it kind of ruins the cover, but I took it up from the library. This was like a last minute read for me in the month of April. I just picked it up at the library because I saw it there and I was like, oh, I really want to read that. I've heard good things. So it's Assembly by Natasha Brown, and it's a short little book, 102 pages, but it really, so it all takes place over the course of one day. We have an unnamed narrator, but we know that she's a young professional woman, black woman, working in, I think, banking or finance. I think banking. And she's in a relationship with a white man who works in the same industry, but he clearly got into the industry fairly easily, and she had to work very, very hard to get to the status level where she is and to get into the profession and to be in the job that she is in. It's set in the countryside, and they're going out to this country house for a party, a garden party. And so you think it's leading up to this garden party, and we actually never get to the garden. During this short span of time, we're in her mind, and she's really thinking about her life and her life experiences. And there's a lot of commentary, of course, about race and about being a woman. She's reflecting on the relationship with her boyfriend and interactions that she's had with her boyfriend, and she's reflecting on interactions that she's had with her coworkers, and just the way that she describes these interactions and the dialogues. It just is so very exposing of what the experience is like to be black, and in her case to be a woman and to be in this industry. So it's pretty interesting. Construction? That is so loud. That's brutal. During this time, and I guess if you don't want any spoilers, maybe just put me on mute for a few minutes, but just during this time, she also discovers that she has cancer, and she's also contemplating whether to seek treatment for the cancer or not, and ultimately she decides not to. And it's just, It's a really heavy book in that way. Small book, but it's really heavy because theme about race, it becomes, she's looking at her life in the context of history, in the context of where we are now versus what it took to get here, about being Black, living in Britain, being in this industry, and it being so systemically racist that her existence is, her existence in and of itself is just perpetuating that circumstance or that problem. So she is also just thinking about her existence as being, it's quite dark. She's very defeated. She's very kind of, the feeling is she just, it seems like she's very, not apathetic isn't really the right word, but it's just that she's very, like she's stepped outside of herself and she sees the whole picture. She's done everything right, she's in the right place, and she still feels that we haven't gotten anywhere. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but anyway, I think it's actually worth it if you pick it up and read it and you tell me what you think. I would definitely recommend it. Assembly by Natasha Brown. So on to the books that I absolutely love. What do we got? Okay. Oh my God, loved. So the next 3 books were the best books that I read this month. And I can't really put them in any kind of order because I loved them all for very different reasons. The first one I'm going to talk about, I just absolutely adored this book. And it's funny because I resisted it for a while. Like a lot of people were talking about how wonderful it was. And I just resisted it and I don't really know why. No particular reason at all. The book I'm referring to is Open Water. My daughter gave me this as a gift at Christmas time, and I'm surprised I haven't read it sooner. Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This book was gorgeous. It was so gorgeous. It was stunning. I mean, and those are big words. I get it. I heard other people speaking about this book in the same way, and I was thinking, yeah, maybe they're exaggerating. But honestly, it's no exaggeration. It's so beautifully written. It's so poetic. It's a debut novel, and it's just gorgeous. Very, like, it was breathtaking. I mean, I'm really gushing now, but the story is about a relationship that starts out as a friendship between the 2 characters. The male character is a photographer, and the female character is a dancer. It's set in London, although she is in Dublin, so she's going back and forth between London and Dublin. But it's set in London, and it's primarily told from the perspective of a male character. And it's completely written in the second person, which did take my brain a moment to adjust to. But as soon as my brain adjusted to it, it was fine. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the narrative. I thought it was really well done. It was so intimate. This book was very intimate. And again, just very beautifully written. I have a bunch of passages marked, but I don't think I'm going to read any of them to you because I'm not sure I could do them justice. And this is a long video. I mean, I think that it describes very well the experience of being a young Black man living in London and the Black experience, but also just, it's that experience of, I don't want to say falling in love, but the experience of the closeness of a close relationship. I don't know if my words will do this book justice. I just think you should pick it up and read it. It was just fantastic. It was just wonderful. I loved it so much. It's the kind of book that you just want to read it over and over. Highly recommend this one. 5 out of 5 stars. And another book that I really loved was Childhood Youth Dependency, Tove Ditlevson. It's translated by Tiina, Nunnally, and Michael Goldman. It's a novel, but it has the feel of a memoir, and the original publication was somewhere between 1969 and 1971. I think she's just a really special writer. I don't know if many people have been talking about this book. I'd heard it or talked about last year and just didn't get to it. I had intended to read it last summer and I finally got to it. It was one of my choices, I think, in March for the readathon, and I ended up finishing it just the beginning of April. But it's also very lyrical. It's about this young girl, Tove, I'm gonna call her Tove. Tove. It's about her desire to be a poet. It's just so well written. It's so expressive of her experiences and her emotions, written in a very beautiful and very imaginative way. I really like reading. It was almost like reading a painful testimony, especially the last book, the book Dependency, which is literally about dependency, so trigger warning for addiction. Oh, it's just so beautiful. her deep love for language and for poetry was so obvious in the way that she wrote, and her drive to be a writer was so strong that it was just very hard hitting in that way. And it was just very special. It was just, she's a very special writer. And it makes me want to read her other novel, although the name of it is escaping me right now. I mean, Patti Smith endorses it on the front. A beautifully written, resilient, and relatable chronicle for the marginalized. And yes, it is about this, like, she grows up being told a woman can't be a poet, women can't do that, and that experience of having to have children and be married and have your success be controlled by a man, a male publisher. That is the experience that is described. I wonder, should I read you something? I mean, she's also really hilarious. I should read you about how she feels about other writers. Why don't we do that? There's this really funny scene where she's young. This is, I think, still in childhood, where she's young and she's in the library and she's talking about how she's reading books in the library and how bad they are. It's pretty funny. She writes, page after page, I don't have it in me to read it. It fills me with sadness and unbearable boredom. I can't understand how language, that delicate and sensitive instrument, can be so terribly mistreated, or how such monstrous sentences can find their way into a book that gets into the library, where a clever and attractive woman like Miss Mollerup, I guess she idolizes Miss Mollerup, actually recommends it to defenseless children to read. For now, however, I can't express these thoughts, so I have to be content with saying that the books are boring and that I would rather have something by Zacharias Nielsen or Wilhelm Borgso. So that gives you a sense. And finally, stick with me. I was like promising I would read Five Little Indians and Scarborough, but I ended up not getting to Five Little Indians, but I did read Scarborough, and it was fan-friggin-tastic by Catherine Hernandez. I didn't know this, but when Catherine Hernandez was younger, she was a young single mother, and she ran a home daycare. So she has this personal experience that informs the writing of this book. This book tells the stories of different kids in a Scarborough neighborhood who are all attending what's supposed to be like an after-school literature program for city kids, but is actually more of a kind of like a haven for the kids, a place where some of them get food to eat, that they don't have enough food at home, so they get their food is supplemented by the snacks that they get. And so it covers, like, it's written from different points of view. The woman who runs this program is a woman named Miss Tiina. She's of Middle Eastern descent. Like, I know she wears a hijab, but I'm not sure exactly what her ethnicity is. It doesn't say, I don't think. A lot of her point of view includes exchanges and messages of communications that she has with her administration. And they're really eye-opening. It's really well done to show how these people on the other side of the program, the ones who are in their office and are not the frontline worker, are very out of touch with the needs and the realities of the kids who are coming into Miss Hina's classroom. It was really good at showing how socioeconomically all of these kids are disadvantaged, but they're all from different backgrounds. Like one of the children is Indigenous, one of the children is, I think, Filipino, one of the children is white, and her father very kind of white supremacist. They all kind of come together at the center with Miss Hina, and Miss Hina is teaching them how to read. It's really sweet. So yeah, I don't know, it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. It kind of shows these windows into these kids' lives, but the characters are really well developed. It's just really interesting how she's able to write about the frontline, show the story of the frontline worker and how important those people are to our communities. How these communities, despite their struggles and despite a system that is so oppressive. There's an opening scene with a woman with one of the main families, where the mom is trying to take her son to a doctor because she thinks that she thinks that he's autistic, and the doctor won't provide an assessment, but refers her to another doctor where she has to take the bus really far to get to that doctor. It's very real. These real situations where the way that we as a society put the responsibility on individuals to take care of themselves, when what we really need to be doing is to be working as a community to take care of one another. And she just does that really, really well. And she shows how well this community can work to support each other, and also how it's really not enough, that we really need to all be working together collectively for the collective good. I listened to a really good interview with Hernandez on the CBC, and I will link it down below. I don't know if those of you who watch my channel were following the Canada Reads while it was happening. I know some people have read Scarborough and thought it was amazing and have recommended it to me, but if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend you read it, and then after you read it, listen to the interview with Hernandez. I still haven't watched the film, but I think I'll watch the film now that I've read the book. That is my wrap up. Oh yeah, 5 out of 5. You know, I don't give star reviews unless I give a 5 out of 5. So thank you very much, guys, for sticking with me through this. I hope that I don't know what I'm gonna do next for another video, because I don't know if you guys want to see a reading vlog, or I don't know what kind of content you want to see. If you have a preference for a certain type of content, let me know in the comment section below, and let me know in the comment section below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd be curious. And if you haven't read some of these books, maybe now, at least for those last few, you'll be interested in reading them, and maybe you'll be warned off some of them. Bye for now. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Buy a ton of toys for a dog, and all they want to do is play with the oven mitt. I'm busy. Accept it. Guest list, other black girl, Lester wanted to like it so badly. Sorry for everybody who loved that book.